Hello and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I am your host, an Untitled Anarchist Seagull by the name of Elise, and yes, that's a bit of an oxymoron. And welcome to JabroniCon, the Irritation Continues, where we'll be raising funds for the Kollontai translation project, which is only $140 short of fully funding the translation of Chapter 2, which I'm more than halfway through now. It's the second to last, and second longest chapter in the book. Each chapter is longer than the last in the book. And so your support in that project is very helpful to me. It's much appreciated. And it helps me eat and stuff while I work on it. Hello, Phoenix. Good to see you. Let me just make sure I'm not about to overload my SSD if I record. Okay. So, let's see what kind of jabroni shit we can bring to the table today. I'm thinking of checking out... I've got some more of the Young Turfs here. And... I'm kind of interested, given the turn they've taken, in checking out Democrats' launch effort to reclaim white voters. This cannot possibly go wrong. Like, every single aspect of this, I mean, this can't possibly be a horrifying thing.
Democrats...
Oh, it's anti-transphobian. Dems launch effort to lure white voters by focusing on race. That's a neat way of saying Democrats decide that the way to beat Trump is to be even more racist than him. Like, trying to, like, emulate one of the most unpopular presidents in U.S. history. Maybe not the strong flex that you think it is. Although, on the other hand, when you've got Biden, who's basically boring Trump, I mean, what the fuck are you gonna do? I mean, at least he can be convincing when he's being racist.
And one particular Democratic
Hello, Ludlow.
organization is launching what they're referring to as a data-driven effort to
Yeah, when you hear data-driven, you know it's bullshit.
Capture white voters who have stopped supporting the party for the past few years. Well, actually for several years now. Now, how do they plan to do it? By leaning into more talk about equity and race. Now,
okay. First of all, specifically wooing white voters is already a fucking... that's just bad. Anything that is specifically targeted at appealing specifically to white people is gonna suck. It's going to be awful. White Stripe, they're called? Wasn't that a fucking, like, hard rock band from the 80s? A more targeted, data-driven approach to trying to get more white supremacists in the party. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting approach when you could just try to appeal to the 30% of the population, the poorest 30%, who mostly don't vote, but when they do vote, they vote for Democrats. But they're not going to do that because that would involve pissing off their donors, and between their donors and their voters, they like their donors better. There's more money coming from the donors.
Organizers say traditional methods in wooing white voters are ineffective.
Which traditional methods?
Often relying on knee-jerk recommendations from an elite group of Democrats that pushes a race-neutral economic message. White Stripe...
Oh, I can see this is going to go really well. They want to have a non-race neutral way of specifically appealing to a certain kind of white people, namely the ones who decide to go for the most racist, the most explicitly racist candidate on the ballot. This is, I mean, you just feel wonderful times are coming when you see this shit. I mean, this is like... I'm flashing back to when the Biden campaign decided that the way to campaign against Trump in 2020 was to say that Biden would actually be more proactive in crushing Black Lives Matter, for fuck's sake.
That's the name of the organization here, say this approach is misguided. They are calling for a more targeted and data-driven approach that they argue will be a better return on investment.
Okay, and I just love that all this fucking capitalist language in there, but now I'm kind of curious. White Stripe, who are these people? The White Stripe Project. Who are these people? I'm not finding anything. Let me see. Okay, Politico. The White Stripe Project is taking more of a data-driven... I mean, do we have, like, names that are associated? A new Democratic-aligned initiative dubbed the White Stripe Project has a novel idea for winning white working-class voters back to the Democratic Party. Lean more into talk of equity and... Okay. But... Okay... let's see. Showing up for racial... Oh, Surge, they suck. Yeah. A public, non-defensive, data-driven conversation. I mean, the minute you hear this shit, just run.
Now, before I continue, I really want to make a clear distinction here, okay? Because what this organization, White Stripe, is trying to do is specifically attract white voters who do not have college degrees, okay? They have flocked over to the right.
No, they really haven't, though, is the thing. They've mostly... You're talking about, I mean, unless you're specifically talking about the ones with money, they've mostly flocked to nobody. That's why, whenever you hear about Trump counties, those are counties where abstention won. In fact... In fucking 2016, the year that Trump won, abstention basically swept the thing. Where Trump was winning, abstention was winning more. Where Clinton was winning, abstention was winning more. So they're specifically focusing on the most reactionary segment when they're doing this. So, yeah, wonderful idea.
And the Democratic Party really believes, you know what, we can get them back. We can get them back. Now,
why do you want them back?
Serves as the executive director of this organization, showing up for racial justice.
Hang on. Oh, Surge. Oh, they suck.
Showing up for racial justice is the name of it. Says hoarding white voters is critical.
I forget what it was that was fucked up about Surge. I seem to remember them being basically trying to lean into the sort of good protester, bad protester shit when people defended themselves against Nazis or something like that. I remember something them being pretty problematic, but it's been a few years.
She says that white voters have disproportionate political power. She told organizers in remarks during the Monday afternoon launch of the...
And what's interesting, okay, and they specifically deprecated the idea of talking about economic issues. Now, there's a reason that isn't working, because the Democrats on economic issues suck. The Democrats sound like the Republicans on economic issues. So, obviously, the people that you're trying to court, namely the better off white voters whose median income was substantially above the national median income, those who specifically went over to Trump because of white identity, according to their polling data, those people they're going to try to win over. They don't want to try. They are going to try to win over with what?
Project. We need a strategy for engaging and organizing them alongside communities of color. Now, I don't think that's an impossible thing to do. I think you could totally do that.
Well, I mean, and she's the person who thinks that who defends Kyle Rittenhouse. So obviously, she's somebody you want to talk to about racial justice.
It's just the strategy they want to implement here. And to be quite honest, they're not very specific about how they intend on implementing this strategy. I just don't think it's going to work. Now, according to Politico, Democratic activists are frustrated.
Well, okay, well, Anna, you're actually kind of in the target demographic. You're a well-off white voter who's decided to lean pretty heavily into the white nationalism of late. What would make you vote Democrat, Anna?
With the party's efforts to specifically target white voters with college degrees. And to be sure, the Democratic Party has increasingly attracted upper-class white voters,
which is a demographic that's great for donors, but the thing is, that's a tiny number of people. That's the whole way that's in fucking electoral system, like in the neoliberal era, is set up, and you see this all sorts of places. You see this in Britain, which is why so many people in the ruling class freaked out over even the mild social democracy of Corbyn. You see this in Germany, you see this in Chile, and the idea is that these parties, these hegemonic parties, or in the US, the only parties that really, not just hegemonic, they're the only ones who are, in any meaningful sense, legal in the country in terms of the electoral system. So, they ensure that you know, poor, lower-income, working-class voters have absolutely no reason to vote. So, and then they fight over rich people. And they don't particularly care, since, I mean, it's all about the interests of donors. They don't really give a shit if they lose, as long as they're getting piles of money.
Over the last 4 election cycles, for instance, white voters without college degrees have flocked to the right. Now, while Joe Biden performed better among the group of white voters without college degrees in 2020 compared to Hillary Clinton just 4 years earlier, Republicans still dominate.
See, the thing is, it isn't just without college degrees, though. It's without college degrees and with high incomes.
According to the Pew Research Center.
Yeah, electoralism has become less relevant to my life. I mean, less irrelevant to anything that goes on each time that there's been an election. I mean, I'm going to accept, you know, binding referenda from that to some extent. But for the most part, it's just pointless. There's so little between these fucking candidates. Like that, the Democrats are all getting behind Henry Cuellar again. The anti-choice pro-NRA asshole. And then they're going to pretend that if we elect them again, then this time they really will restore reproductive freedom. They don't give a fuck.
Biden carried 33% of this bloc, while then-President Donald Trump carried 65%. There's a caveat. The caveat, according to Pew, was that the vote total Trump carried with non-college educated whites was nearly identical to what he pulled in 2016.
In other words, you could more or less ignore them.
So let's pause and understand what that means. So
what that means is that this is fucking pointless. Yeah, I mean, when I hear these people talking harm reduction and lesser evilism and all that stuff, it's like, if you met me back in about 2004, I felt that way too. But I've seen a lot since then, and I can no longer actually, in good conscience, make those arguments, because every single one of them I've seen refuted by reality in one place or another.
And here is, alright, Trump had the same amount of support from white voters without a college degree.
Again, it's white voters without a college degree with a median income of $70,000 a year.
In 2020, as he did in 2016. Now, Biden managed to increase his support among white voters without a college degree, meaning that an increased number of white voters turned up to vote, and they cast their ballots for Biden. So what they're trying to do here is encourage more of these voters who typically...
Yeah, which, I mean, again, it's like... There are ways you could probably just blow these pricks out of the water if they wanted to. And when I point out what they could do... see, it's funny. We're in this weird paradoxical time where the people who are actually trying to generate false hope tend to be the people who claim that, you know, the presidency is a powerless office, the Democrats can't do anything. Whereas the people who are trying to dispel false hope are the ones who are pointing out, look, they have all these options they could use, readily could use, and they're not going to, because they don't want to, because their priorities aren't the same as ours, and the only way we're gonna ever get anything good is if we actually come together and fucking take it for ourselves. But, I mean...
or non-voters, to get out the vote and support Biden. Now, the White Stripe Project thinks that...
Well, no, they didn't cut out the vote to support Biden. They got out the vote to prevent Trump coming back. Because, again, that isn't in itself a hard argument to make, because he's, like, historically unpopular. Everybody hated the guy. The number of people who actually liked him throughout has always been a minority.
That these white voters are gettable. And the way to attract them to the blue side of the aisle is to dive deeper into culture wars.
Oh god. First of all, fuck you with that term culture wars. I mean, it's another, like, weird paradox, because war actually seems like it's not trivializing, because war, you know, I mean, it's a war, but on the other hand, it's, like, used ironically, when the reality is, this is an actual fucking war. It's got actual fucking refugees. They're actual fucking people getting killed. You know, I mean, when they try to say the culture war, they're actually, first of all, there hasn't really been any indication that that's even what's going on. They're trying to trivialize what are actually life and death issues for millions of people. But of course, if they really gave a shit, they could blow the Republicans out of the water simply by running on a program of restoring LGBT rights, restoring fucking abortion rights, universal public free healthcare for everybody in the country, and let the people out of the fucking cages. Those are all extremely popular things to stand for. They would wipe the floor, you know, they would basically shut the Republicans out of government over a long period of time by doing that, as they once did when they actually embraced things like that back in the 60s, with the Great Society and all that shit. But they're not going to, because they don't give a fuck about that, because their fucking donors would have kittens if they start talking about cutting the insurance companies out of healthcare provision, just because roughly 93% of the population despise them.
That's literally what Steve
That's
Phillips,
also according to polling data.
who's a longtime Democrat and a Democratic strategist, told Politico. He is described as a thought leader. Now,
oh, okay, so definitely somebody not to listen to. You hear the term thought leader, you can more or less just ignore the person.
Now, he says that far too often, Democrats and deep-pocketed donors settle on narratives about past elections that then inform future contests with little empirical data to back up those entrenched beliefs.
Which is true, actually. I mean, it's why you always hear this idea, and this is true in Britain as well. You hear it with Labour. Every time Labour lose on a horrible right-wing manifesto, they're like, you get all the fucking media talking heads, all the pundits come out of the woodwork and like, oh, they weren't right-wing enough. And shit like that. They have to be electable. They need to be more right-wing. And, you know, and it's the same bullshit you see in the op-eds here when the Democrats get their asses handed to them. When the reality is, the problem is they're already too right-wing and nobody feels any particular... you know, millions of people can see absolutely no relevancy of these elections to their lives because they're going to get screwed no matter who gets in.
Now get a load of this. One of those narratives and other activists is the notion among the donor class that a focus on racial issues should be abandoned.
Yeah, but what's the focus you want to have on racial issues, my dude? What's the focus you want to have? Like, I mean, Richard Spencer focuses on racial issues. And he's trying to appeal to upper middle class white people, too. So, I mean, is that what you're talking about? You're talking about something else. Let's have some fucking specifics. And a neutral message centered around the economy isn't so much the problem. If you were to center it around the economy, and specifically around changing the way the economy works to actually, like, lift the roughly 50% of the population who can't make ends meet out of poverty. I mean, and people actually seriously believed they were going to do that, again, they would kick ass. Because it's not that the motherfuckers on the other side are all that popular, it's that you have this situation where you have two unpopular motherfuckers running against each other, and then you have roughly 100 million motherfuckers who can't be bothered because they say because they can tell, they have rationally analyzed the situation, something that, of course, like a lot of pundits and a lot of comrades who really ought to know better will not actually give ordinary working people credit for being able to do, and they've rationally analyzed the situation, realized both these motherfuckers are going to screw me over, so it really doesn't matter, and I'm going to get fired if I go to work, so there's no point, I'm not going to, if I go to vote instead of go to work, so why the fuck am I going to waste my time on this bullshit?
In favor of a more race-neutral...
I don't think TYT was ever taken seriously by most people on the left. I mean, it's popular amongst sort of progressive leaning liberals, although they seriously burned a lot of bridges when Anatransphobian decided to just lean heavily into slagging off trans women. Hi, Kenkeros. And then went on Adam and Sitch to say a bunch of white nationalist shit, and Jenk was like, hey, that's based, we're gonna do that. And I think they lost a lot of support amongst the people who normally watch them. But they also probably picked up support amongst people who normally would watch Tim Pool.
Neutral message centered around the economy. What? Donors? You think donors are showing up to Democrats' offices?
Yes, actually. I mean, that's not something we have to think, Anna. We know it happens. In fact, we often have the logs, the visitor logs, so we can see which donors are doing it. We could go on opensecrets.org and look at who's handing money to who. This isn't, like... You think the donors don't have influence, Anna? Is that what you're saying?
And lobbying them to, like...
Well, what do you think donors are doing, Anna?
Focus on improving their material conditions?
No, that's not what he said. He very, very specifically avoided saying that. He said a narrow focus on economic issues. That doesn't mean improving anyone's material conditions, except for the specific donors. I mean, and if by their material conditions you mean the material conditions of the donors, yeah, damn right. Yeah, that's exactly what they're lobbying them to do. But focusing on the economy, like, I mean, since the Clinton era, that basically means saying the economy is great. At least if a Democrat's running the place. You know, pretending that the economy is essentially just Wall Street. Bonsoir, Yoko.
No, that's not what donors do. Donors like...
I mean, at this point, oh wait, GGM and Henkiros are not the same person? Okay, this is very confusing to me. I'd somehow come to the idea of conflating them. I mean, actually, most of their positions are just straight up liberalism. But they have some stuff that's also just far right, like their position on trans people, or their position on whether neo-Nazi mass shooters should go to jail for it.
Deregulation. They love their tax cuts.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the narrow focus on economic issues is.
The last thing donors want is for our politicians to push for economic policies that improve the material conditions of everyone.
Yeah, and you'll notice that nothing there actually said that. Nothing in that piece you just read said that. That's not, I mean, she had it right the first time when she said this is really vague. It is really vague. A narrow focus on the economy can mean a million things. It does not automatically mean that.
That would mean more spending, which means more taxation, and possibly more regulation.
What do you mean, possibly? It would mean more fucking regulation. It might mean actually having some rules that say you've got to have more than 2 people on a hazmat train. Maybe some safety standards on how those hazmat trains are set up. You know, so that they don't just fucking derail and poison an entire little small town in northeastern Ohio. Yeah, it would definitely involve more fucking regulation, Anna. But that's not what he's saying.
Now, Politico mentions that Phillips is the chair of the Sander Phillips Center, so I was curious about that organization, never heard anything about them, so I did a little bit of digging to figure out what the organization is all about. Since Politico reported that the people behind the project, Project White Stripe, are progressives.
Which is a fucking meaningless term. I'm pretty sure Anna Transphobian would still call herself progressive. Hillary Clinton calls herself progressive. It's fucking meaningless.
Well, the organization is chaired by Susan Sandler, who on the group's website is described as follows. A philanthropist?
Philanthropist and political donor. Yeah, of course. It's donors all the way down. You don't get to be a Democrat political strategist or a Republican political strategist, for that matter, if you don't have at least some connections to at least some deep pockets. She was also the lead investor in the independent activities supporting Kamala Harris's 2010 campaign for California Attorney General. And Cory Booker's, so, like, okay, yes, okay, Democratic strategists, they suck, and they have money.
Donor. She was the first and largest donor behind the independent efforts to support Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. She was also the lead investor in the independent activities supporting Kamala Harris's 2010 campaign for California Attorney General and Cory Booker's 2013 election.
Yeah, so, I mean, she sucks. But, I mean, that usually you like things that suck, Anna.
To the United States Senate. So look, in other words, she has been supportive of the type of neoliberal Democrats who have emphasized identitarian and culture war politics in lieu of economic policy.
No, they have focused heavily on economic policy. Very specific kinds of economic policy. See, this idea that, see, what she's trying to do here, this is a move a lot of reactionaries like Anna Transphobian do. They will try to create this idea that neoliberalism is when identity. And no, that's not when neoliberalism is a specific set of economic policies, and often you will find it, and the thing is, you can find it on both sides of the political class. It is the hegemonic economic ideology of our time that you don't really have any non-neoliberal politicians out there. You have neoliberal politicians who are out, are out and proud white supremacists. You have neoliberal politicians who claim to be against racism. But the point is, when they talk about economic policies, it's all this market-based bullshit. And supposedly, markets and NGOs and shit are, also, du brauchst dich eigentlich überhaupt nicht zu entschuldigen. Ja, das sind halt ähnliche Nutzernamen. Yeah, I mean, I never took her seriously to begin with. I never gave a fuck about her. I just find her an interesting case study. So, so people like this, I mean, I think Ben Burgess is another example of this bullshit. They will try to act like any specific effort to address the issue of, say, white supremacism or transphobia is inherently neoliberal, because you need to be focusing on, on class in this extremely narrow sense that basically means that you're only talking about white cis-het workers, preferably university educated.
Person who thinks the White Stripe Project's electoral strategy is a good idea, though she's not part of it, is Liz Smith. Remember her? She was the senior advisor for Pete Buttigieg during the 2020...
Yeah, which is to say that this is just... this is a rebranding effort. These are all rebranding people. Obama was a rebranding effort.
Presidential election. Well, look... To her credit, she also notes that Democrats have been losing support among working class voters from all backgrounds.
Well, yeah, but losing support makes it sound. See, in this electoralist discourse, the idea is that they're losing support and they're going over to Republicans. That's not, for the most part, what's happening. What is overwhelmingly happening is quite specifically that they're going over to not voting. Most of the people who are eligible to vote in the U.S. either would never consider voting Republican. Republicans are a minority preference, and they know it, which is why vote suppression has been such an important aspect of their strategy, quite openly since the 1980s, but even before that. But so often when they try to have this idea of like using specifically white supremacist shit, and we're gonna bring back the people who went over to Trump. They're totally ignoring roughly 1/3 of the electorate, and the reality is, if they were to actually directly engage that 1/3, it would be no contest. But they don't want to because donors don't like it, and fucking Liz Smith and Surge and these people, none of them are going to. I mean, the people behind White Stripe, fuck it out. Because, I mean, one of the things, apart from everything else about that, what sucks about that name is that it is reifying white identity. And if you're trying to actually break down white supremacist systems, you've got to break down that entire idea. Because the whole point of white, which is an extremely fluid and ever-changing concept, is just that's the top of a white supremacist hierarchy. That's all it is. White is not some specific culture or heritage or anything like that. It doesn't even necessarily mean skin color. There are plenty of examples of people being denied entry to whiteness despite having the same complexion as the people who were in charge of whiteness. You have to actually be breaking down the entire notion of it. But so, like, maintaining a focus on white identity and then at the same time claiming to be, like, fighting racism, that doesn't work.
She says that Democrats have been underperforming generally with working class voters.
And she's right. I mean, I wouldn't say they've underperformed, I'd say they've overperformed. Because when you look at what they have to offer most people, I mean, they and the Republicans have to offer most people. It's a wonder that they get more than single digits.
Whether they're white, Latino, or black. And that's an issue that we need to work on. But the solutions won't be found in turning our back on some of our most devoted voters. And I agree with her.
Yeah, because it's vague as hell.
She's right. Economic conditions have hurt the Democrats, along with Latino voters.
Yeah, but the thing is, they're never going to change their economic policy. Unless, of course, we get to a situation where it looks like the options, like FDR faced, where the options are business as usual or some sort of mass working class uprising. Then they might start reconsidering. But as long as that's not happening, they're not going to change their approach. Because their approach is calculated to make their donors happy.
They have lost support among them. Let's take a look at what happened during the midterm elections.
While Latinos lean Democrat and...
Okay, we've already got a problem here because they're not breaking up Latina people into racial categories, because there are this idea when you look at Latina voters that they will like say, oh wow, look at all these Latina voters who fucking went over to the Republicans, but those are the white ones. They're the people who represent the far right back home, back in Latin America too. It is a multiracial category that is actually meaningless within Latin America, because all it means is people whose origins are in Latin America in some way. So you can be Latina and Arab, white, black, fucking Jewish, indigenous, all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds and racial categories and things like that. And so these sorts of polls are used in a misleading kind of a way. By not breaking that down, it makes it think that it's all the exact same people. And it is not.
For Democratic control of Congress, support for the GOP is up 10 points over 5 midterm cycles.
Yeah, but are they white Latina people? Almost certainly. Oh, see, look, we're gonna go to, okay, this is okay, we're talking the, Cuban exile community.
By some are calling the Latino voter the sleeping giant.
Republicans figured out how to connect with Latino voters culturally.
Well, no, they figured out that if they embrace a sort of big tent approach to fascism, then you can get the people who support people like Cast in Chile, or Uribe, or Duque in Colombia, or Capriles, or Guaidó in Venezuela, or Macri in Argentina. I mean, or Peña Nieto, ese hueón. Yeah, because that is very much the rich white minorities province. And some of them move up here. In fact, the US has been a very common place for racist white rich people from Latin America to go when the government gets a little bit too social democratic for their liking.
This is not about policy. This is about...
Yeah, not only is Asian broad and vague as hell, it depends in different English-speaking countries. Asian without a prefix means different things. If you say Asian in Britain, it means South Asian. It means, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. Whereas here, of course, it means East Asia, because that's where the main Asian, like the earliest Asian immigration came. Oh, well, quite simply because the thing you have to keep in mind is that the majority of the Latin American population is not primarily of European descent. They are largely of indigenous descent, mixed with all sorts of other things. It's a multi-ethnic society. And actually, it's only fairly recent that Southern Europeans would definitely be included within the concept of whiteness. It's worth noting. That was not the case in the US throughout the entire 20th century. Southern Europeans were lumped in with Jews. Definitely well outside of the concept of whiteness.
People's view of the country. What are the issues that are on the minds of voters right now in this district?
Inflation. Gas prices, good jobs. Number one is like, la cosa está muy mala. Things are really bad.
Inflation, gas prices, good jobs.
Which also, again, vague as fuck. Yeah, you can say those three things. It doesn't fucking mean anything.
They want, you have to listen to them. Just laid out for you right there.
No, she didn't. She just said three things. If you actually look at the polls, and what you'll find is, for example, overwhelming majority of the population want to get insurance companies out of healthcare provision. They think that actually maybe having to go into 5-figure debt when you turn 18 just to be able to get a post-secondary education kind of sucks, and they'd like to see less of that. You actually, if you look at what people say they want, and the people who are talking to fucking, Latina Republican organizers, you're talking about the upper class, and you're talking largely about white Latina people.
Now, the Associated Press reported in June that Democratic candidates won 57% of Hispanic voters during last year's midterms.
And again, okay, and Hispanic, same bullshit problem. You gotta break that down, because there's a big difference between the people who immigrate, whose background is from La Conde in Santiago, or Puerto Madero in Argentina, or the rich white neighborhoods that usually are inhabited by people who basically just own entire countries in Latin America, and the people who are living in the working class areas and who had to fucking dodge and had to fucking dodge CBP and a bunch of fucking Texan Nazis and whatever just to get across the border. You lump them together, and it's great if you want to have bad analysis, and of course, liberals love bad analysis.
A smaller percentage than the 63% of Hispanic voters Biden won in 2020, and the 66% of Hispanic voters supporting the party in 2018 when Democrats took control of the House, according to an Associated Press VoteCast, a sweeping survey of the national electorate. Meanwhile, 39% of Hispanic voters backed Republicans last year.
Yeah, and again, which ones? That is a fucking... That category is so useless for any kind of analysis. I mean, when they were all... like, all the reactionaries a couple of years ago were trying to show, look, Trump can't be racist, look at all these Hispanic voters who voted for him, and then somebody actually found a study that broke it down, and it turned out, yeah, it was like white Cuban exiles and white white people from all over Latin America. I mean, white supremacy is a kind of a big thing in Latin America. They've got their own fucking neo-Nazis, and if you go to the halls of power, the corridors of power anywhere in Latin America, you'll find a bunch of blonde-haired, blue-eyed motherfuckers with names that are not Spanish. I mean, it is a meaningless concept. But, yeah...
A tick up from the 30...
And several ethnicities and ethnic backgrounds and linguistic and cultural backgrounds in every single one of those countries. Because you've got all sorts of different indigenous populations, and then you have, like, the different settler communities. Like, Chile is the one I know the best. I mean, you've got, like, you've got Castilians and Catalans and Basques. There's a whole Basque aristocracy that's a thing in Chile. But then you've got, like, the Croatians and Serbians who showed up in the late 19th century for the Southern Gold Rush. And you have a whole bunch of really dodgy Germans who showed up at various times and set up really dodgy German colonies that... I wouldn't go there personally. And then you have a huge Palestinian community. I think the largest Palestinian community outside of Palestine in Chile, and a Korean and a Chinese and a Japanese community, although not as big as the one that there is in Peru, where that is like the largest. I mean, Peru and Brazil, I think, are where they have the largest immigration from China and Japan in South America. So every one of these societies is multicultural and multi-ethnic and multilingual as fuck. And in the U.S., they're just sort of like meat ground down into this analytical ground chuck that is Hispanic voters. It's fucking meaningless.
Who supported former President Donald Trump's re-election bid. And as we shared with you earlier this week, the Democrats are also experiencing less support among young black male voters as well.
Wow, it's almost like screwing those people over makes them not like you. It's almost like maybe what the Democrats, if they really wanted to win people's support, is stop screwing them over. So there would be at least one electoral option that wasn't screwing them over, as opposed to two electoral options that are. Like, I mean, wow, are you really shocked that young black men might be souring on the Democratic Party? They have this huge fucking uprising against racist police terror in 2020, and what do the Democrats respond with? They respond by saying they'd crack down on it harder than Trump has. And doing absolutely nothing. Like, their answer to every single one of the just urgent demands of this population have been more fucking cops and more oil and gas extraction. That's the two things. They don't give a shit about anything else, but there'll be more cops and more oil and gas extraction.
Black voter turnout overall dropped by 10% in last year's midterms compared to 2018. Now, Brittany Smith, who's the executive director of the Philadelphia-based Black Leadership PAC, told the Washington Post that, quote, when you think about election cycle to election cycle, black voters have been telling us for a long time what matters.
And since this is just this is again the donor class we're listening to, the Black Leadership PAC. Notice there's absolutely nothing about, say, the school to prison pipeline. There's nothing to do with the fact that cops are, community neighborhoods that are safe. That is a fucking meaningless term because that encompasses both people who are talking specifically about, I don't know, like street level crime or something like that, but also people who are talking about the terror of walking down the street and having to worry about encountering the cops and get shot.
They want to put food on the table, a roof over their heads, send kids to good schools, live in neighborhoods that are safe.
This is just so fucking vague because these PACs, they don't want to actually talk about what any of that means. Like, why these are problems, why putting food on the table, roof over their head, having good schools to send kids to, and live in neighborhoods that aren't, like, being terrorized, why those are things that they need to ask for rather than just shit they can take for granted. And PACs don't want to talk about that, because they're made up of people who made their money off of the fact that things are the way they are.
I don't think the issues are new. It's the way
you think?
Talk about them. And the way we're centering the voice of the people who live in these communities. So look,
you mean really, really vaguely?
How much the Democrats have hyper-focused on identitarianism and pro-corporate neoliberal policies. How exactly
they haven't focused on identitarianism. Like, in fact, they've done a very just perfect job of avoiding it. Like, they've done nothing for, say, abortion rights, even though the majority of the population wants them, and they are either gone or under massive threat in most of the country. Most people think it's actually a problem. A Fox News poll found that 78% of respondents, whether Democrat or Republican, thought it was a problem that trans people were being targeted by the political class. You see Democrats doing anything about that? Where's this identitarianism? You mean the fact that they, like, every time anyone raises their voice and makes any kind of demand, they send more fucking cops? Like, where's this identitarianism?
Does the White Stripe Project think that using better data is going to make this failed tactic work in the future?
What failed tactic, though? What do you even mean by identitarianism?
It's like coming across a burning building and deciding that pouring more lighter fluid on it will put out the blaze, as long as you have some statistical data telling you that lighter fluid works. Now, universal and race-neutral economic policy...
There's no such thing as race-neutral economic policy in a white supremacist regime. There just isn't, because if you have race neutral policies, the way things are set up, they will necessarily screw over everybody who's getting screwed over, who's on the uncomfortable end of white supremacism, because that's the way it's set up. It is set up so that even if you decide we're going to have some help for working class people, the people who are going to get it are actually often going to be the ones who need the least help.
Would have broader appeal among the electorate. In fact,
what policies, though? Like, this is so vague. And the reason it's vague, I am fairly convinced of this, is that this is about not embarrassing the Democrats. Because the thing is, if you were to actually join 78% of the population, according to one poll, and I've seen 60% elsewhere, in saying it's actually kind of terrible that abortion rights aren't guaranteed anymore and trans people are being persecuted and all this shit, they would actually be embarrassing the Democrats, because the Democrats don't care. They're not doing anything with it. So they don't. Instead, they act like the Democrats are doing too much of the thing they're not doing, and need to do even more of the thing they're already doing in a way that sucks, but without giving any specifics, because if you said, yeah, like, one thing that would really make a difference is if they were for, like, universal public health care, because most people want that. You can't say that because you know the Democrats are against it.
To push for universal economic policies that emphasize the diversity of the working class,
then they aren't going to be race neutral, because they're going to have to take into account that some members of the working class are getting doubly screwed over, because they're getting screwed over just by, like, in the normal capitalist way, and they're being screwed over in the racist capitalist way.
is really the only way I see Democrats implementing a successful strategy here.
So, like, with nothing, just hot air, basically. She hasn't given any, like... She complains about how vague the white stripe bullshit is, but her bullshit's just as vague.
Focusing on class does not mean that you abandon marginalized communities.
Well, you have. I mean, yeah, you haven't abandoned marginalized communities. You've actually gone on the attack against them.
Class politics is the most intersectional type of politics in America.
Yeah, and why do you think the Democrats are not going to do class politics in any way other than the one they already do, where it's bourgeois class politics, Anna? Does anything occur to you why there might be a class interest or something like that?
Marginalized communities are overrepresented in the lowest rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. Black and Hispanic
and that's why you can't do fucking economic policy on a race-neutral basis, and expect results that end up getting equally good outcomes for everybody.
Are disproportionately employed in minimum wage jobs. In fact, let's take a look at the numbers. So, 31.3% of black workers...
See, I mean, this is Anna Transphobian saying, look, I mean, she knows she did say that white nationalists should get to do mass shootings of anti-racist protesters, and that Amy, what's her name, who tried to have the black bird watcher in Central Park swatted, so that she knows she said that those people were doing the right thing, but she still got your back.
And 30.7% of Hispanic workers would receive a raise if the minimum wage was raised to $15 per hour.
And 100% would actually still not be able to make rent, because that's still not enough. That was $15 an hour was the demand 13 years ago, is when people were demanding $15 an hour, and the Democrats didn't give a shit about it. The, like, mainstream unions didn't give a shit about it at the time, the AFL-CIO unions. And nobody said anything. Like, 10 years later, when inflation ate up most of the value of that wage increase, then they started saying $15 an hour. At this point, it would have to be like $25 an hour.
If you want to compare that to white people, 18.4% of white American workers would also see a pay raise if the minimum wage was lifted, meaning that black and Hispanic Americans are disproportionately affected.
Meaning that's an oddly sort of circular way of saying that. You could have just said all of these people, this percentage of this population is making less than $15 an hour.
By these lower wages. But you get more support for a policy if it universally benefits people. If you try to sell something as a policy that only benefits one group based on what that one group's identity is...
You mean like you're doing by sort of focusing on what white liberal rich people want?
It's gonna be harder to pass it. You guys get what I'm saying?
No.
Now, student loan debt relief, another example. That would be a universal economic policy. It's not based on race or gender, right? It benefits...
Well, I mean, in a sense it is, because the demographics of who gets into university are not all equal for all ethnic and gender-based groups. But I mean, it would be universal certainly for everybody who goes to university and isn't rich.
It's all borrowers. However, black borrowers are disproportionately burdened by student loan debt. As of 2019, a typical black student loan...
Yeah, and do you see the Democrats doing anything about that? I mean, a big part of why this is such a problem is your guy, Biden. He was the one who, like, spearheaded the bill to make it harder for those of us who have been suffocating under student loan debt to just discharge it in bankruptcy.
Borrower will still owe 95% of loans 20 years after starting college, compared to only 6% for a white borrower. Now, a single-payer healthcare system would also be
something the Democrats are also against.
universal, and marginalized communities stand to benefit from it the most. Look, I'm going to give you one.
Yeah, but the thing is, again, they're against all this shit. So what is your... I mean, if you're going to talk about these things as electoral issues, you have to explain what your plan is to force these motherfuckers to actually support the things that most people support. You can't just say... Because, I mean, yeah, the Democrats would clean up. It's true. If they credibly, you know, they said, we're going to give you universal public health care, free at the point of use, in the next legislature period, if you put us in, and people actually believed they were going to do it. That's key. If people don't believe a word they say, then it doesn't really matter what they say. And, you know, we're going to just immediately write off student loan debt and fuck the student loan vulture companies, let them take the hit. And people actually believed it. Yeah, I mean, they would. The Republicans would not even actually get to see what color they were. But there's a reason they're not going to do that, Anna. And it rhymes with ass interest.
Example, and I think this is super important. Members of the transgender community who have chosen.
Oh, now she's got trans people's back all of a sudden. You know, the fucking misbirthing people.
To transition will need medical attention for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and it's banned in 68% to varying degrees in 68% of the area of the continental U.S. landmass, Anna. And you've actually kind of helped provide the propaganda justification for that. So, you're gonna pretend that you're on side now? With no fucking apologies? Fuck you!
Which is a path to financial hardship and bankruptcy given our broken healthcare system.
Well, not to mention the fact that now people are having to flee their home states in order to avoid getting prosecuted for even seeking it, or having their children fucking taken away from them to be tortured by bigots. I mean, and when you go through your bullshit about birthing people, Anna, you're helping those motherfuckers. So I mean, you're gonna pretend that... You see, the thing about universal health care is that it only will have universal benefits if everybody's health care is legal. And at this point, everybody's health care is not legal. That's the problem. If you need an abortion in a lot of this country, you're shit out of luck. If you need... if you need transition-related healthcare and you live in fucking Florida or Tennessee or Texas, you're shit out of luck. If your kid needs it, then you're even more shit out of luck because they might try to fucking take your kid away. So you can't just say we're going to have universal healthcare. You would also need to protect trans rights specifically, something that Anna opposes. Although now she's trying to make us forget that.
On the other hand, identity politics, which highlights our immutable differences and front-loads these characteristics.
See, I mean, fuck you with the term identity politics right there. Because what she's doing is what a lot of these pricks do. See, the way you can test the concept of identity politics and see whether it's being honestly done... Oh, wait, she's saying that, okay, HB2 is a law, this is from a couple of years ago, that was going to ban trans people from public spaces by banning trans people from public toilets. And now she's saying standing against laws that explicitly persecute trans people is identity politics. Unlike, say, promoting policies that promote white identity politics, straight identity politics, cis identity politics. See, the test of any critique of identity politics is whether it acknowledges that white cishet identity politics exist, and not only that, are the dominant form of identity politics in our society. Most of them don't, and that's how you know it's actually just people wanting to not do anything about marginalized people.
In Democratic campaigning divides us.
Yeah, well, yeah, for example, support for trans rights divides us between 78% of people who, at the very least, have at least some level of human decency, and 22% of people who don't. For example, guess what? I mean, fucking, you think that there isn't a division being created when you demand something like universal health care? You are creating a division there. It is specifically a division between the political class and the majority of the population. And that is the main division that you find when you look at the polls. I mean, this is just so fucking disingenuous.
The culture wars distract from what binds us together as workers.
Fuck you, the culture wars. This is life and death shit. Just because it doesn't affect your lily white ass does not mean that it is somehow trivial. See, this is what I'm talking about with white identity politics right here. White cishet identity politics. She thinks that because she's not personally affected by any of these things, that it's okay not to give a shit about them.
It encourages members of different races, sexes, sexual identities, and religious beliefs to fight for the scraps left behind by the elite who successfully pit us against one another.
Yeah, and tell us what universal health care at the federal level does if in 68% of the surface area of the continental U.S., trans people aren't allowed to have health care? How's that going to work? You can get free health care, but you have to travel interstate to get it. So that isn't free, because traveling interstate isn't free.
It conditions us to celebrate the tokenization.
I wouldn't actually say choosing whether or not to adopt, seek citizenship is identity politics. That is very much a practical decision. We're meant to think that it's this big, spiritual fucking nationalist thing, but the reality is, if you live in a country, then there are obvious practical reasons why you would want it to be illegal to kick you out of it. Like, if you are living long-term in, say, Germany, and you don't have an EU citizenship, which already gives you a certain level of protection, and also political representation, potentially, at least to the extent that that's possible within capitalism, then there is a definite benefit that has nothing to do with you adopting a German identity in any other sense, to having a passport that says the German government has to let you in, can't kick you out, and to the extent that there are laws that say that certain benefits are only available to citizens, you get those. I mean, that is very much a practical decision. It's made to look like something else, but it's just practical. And in these times, basically most people, I would say, need at least 2 passports. Because you have to be able to get the fuck out and have somebody who will have to take you in. And most people only have one place, and if that place becomes unsafe for them, they're fucked.
Of marginalized groups in government roles and corporate boards, knowing that these acts do little to improve the lives.
Well, yeah, but how about actually just having a law on the books that says trans people have a right to health care? It's a crime to deny them that. Yeah, I mean, fuck representation on corporate boards and all that bullshit. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what HB2 is about that you made a point of showing us. I mean, that was really fucking mask off. Because HB2 was the bathroom bill in North Carolina. And acting like there's something wrong with opposing a bill that that would effectively ban trans people from public life in the state. I mean, yeah, that's just a big fuck you. Fuck you. Everybody gets a fuck you.
Symbols of false progress. And as the rich hoard even more wealth, the political left,
Who's helping them? Your friends, the Democrats, are. That's right.
in my opinion, delude themselves into thinking they're fighting for justice and equality. In reality, organizing labor becomes more difficult because we're all conditioned to think that our personal identity is the most important thing in the world.
No, that's actually bullshit. Because the thing about organizing workers is that if you have a situation, racism, for example, and transphobia and sexism, these things are toxic to any kind of working class organization. Which is why you absolutely have to nip that shit in the bud. Which is why a lot of, like, union-busting campaigns are very racist, very sexist, very transphobic and shit like that. I mean, you can look at just recent examples, but I mean, you can go back a century and you can still find examples of explicitly racist and sexist union-busting propaganda campaigns. Because you need... Because people in the non-marginalized segment of the working class, the segment of the working class that's only getting screwed over on account of being working class and nothing else. The people who... though they are conditioned, like Anna, to see their own position as just the only legitimate protagonism in the situation. And to think that there's something, that it's an imposition that they should have to organize with all these trans people and black people and women and whatever. And you have to fucking combat that. And the way you combat... Yeah, you can't just sleep on that. Because then you end up with unions that aren't worthy of the name. You end up with unions like, as one of my favorite movies, one of the main characters, Joe Kenahan, who's a union organizer in Mingo County during the Coal Wars in West Virginia in the 1920s, says that any union that acts like that, any union that won't have him in, ain't a union, it's a goddamn club. I mean, so you can't just pretend that fighting racism and all this shit is separate. This is just a watered down version of Caleb Maupin's bullshit.
Our peers who disagree with us should be shamed and treated as outcasts.
Fuck you. How are you being treated as an outcast? You said you're racist and transphobic bullshit. You still got your job. Your boss has backed you up to the hilt. You're trying to pretend that you're some sort of a victim, but here you are. You're not being silenced.
Apparently the Biden campaign, though, has caught on to how important it is to center economic messaging while also discussing how these politics benefit marginalized communities.
Which is to say, not at all, because their economic plan is just straight up neoliberalism. It's just, I mean, it's just right-wing bullshit. They're not doing anything that might actually lift people out of poverty. They are specifically refusing to do that.
Biden plans to visit Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's district in Georgia.
Who gives a fuck? I mean, granted, I mean, he's probably felt very lonely in Washington since the OG Jim Crow caucus, Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms and Trent Lott and all those pricks are no longer there, and so he probably will feel more at home hanging out with MTG. But other than that, who gives a shit?
For the groundbreaking of a new solar facility. And he released...
Yeah, and according to the law that the Inflation Reduction Act that we were told was some sort of great coup for the climate, for every solar facility that's authorized, they also have to authorize more oil and gas extraction. So, yeah, I mean, it I guess you could say it is a coup in the sense of just a hit against the climate.
A campaign ad using video of Greene's own speech, talking about Bidenomics and comparing him to Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Yeah, which is ridiculous because there is nothing fucking FDR-like about his economic policies. He has been on the side, and he hasn't been alone in the Democratic Party on this, for fuck's sake, but he has been on the side of dismantling the New Deal for as long as he's been in Congress, as long as he's been in Washington, and that's like half a century.
And Lyndon B. Johnson.
Joe Biden had the largest public investment in social infrastructure and environmental programs that is actually finishing what FDR started.
Yeah, which, I mean, that's such bullshit, but it's just another example of the only people who make Democrats Democrats really sound good are Republicans.
That LBJ expanded on, and Joe Biden is attempting to complete programs to address education, medical care, urban problems, rural poverty, transportation, Medicare, Medicaid, labor unions.
Yeah, I mean, he isn't really.
And he still is working on it.
I mean, it's just not fucking true.
I just love that Marjorie Greene listed those things as if they're unpopular.
Well, I mean, I just find it interesting that she listed those things as if they were true. It's true, they are very popular. They're way more popular than her ass. They're way more popular than Joe Biden, who's against all that shit.
And, she really thought she was taking some digs at Biden there. But good job for the Biden campaign, basically using that to their advantage.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a complete lie, and if she was anything other than just a shill for the Democrats, she'd be pointing out that it's a complete lie.
And look, honestly, I think comparing Biden to FDR or LBJ is kind of laughable.
Sorry? What'd you say?
Honestly, I think comparing Biden to FDR or LBJ is kind of laughable.
Okay, that's a relief. Yeah, I mean, it's utterly fucking hallucinatory.
But at least he seems to understand how popular those presidents were.
No, maybe he understands, maybe he doesn't. It does not show in his policies, though, because he is still dismantling their legacy.
One of them?
Their legacy, which of course was something that they did under massive pressure from popular struggle.
Created Social Security, the other Medicare. These are two wildly popular.
They also created AFDC in most of the welfare state, which the Democrats who played a major role in getting rid of, which is a big part of why we've got so much fucking poverty now.
And universal social programs that
yeah, FDR is not a good example for universal social programs because the New Deal was very specifically designed so that it wouldn't benefit black people.
Materially improved people's lives. That's how you win.
Thanks for watching
Yeah, and they're doing the exact opposite of that. Biden has never been that guy. Fucking hell. Yeah, I mean, Anna-transphobian is doing her usual. Okay, let's switch around. Okay, get rid of that. A little bit less Anna-transphobian in reaction fodder. Yeah, we've had enough fucking... Okay, some Xander hole. I know at least one person in chat's gonna be happy that I just said that. The most manipulative leftist exposed. Oh, so maybe this is about... Well, no, he's not a leftist. It couldn't be about him.
So I have been gone for a few days now due to some false strikes on my channel that now YouTube has graciously removed. I'm very happy to be back now, but unfortunately, my time away and being banned from uploading falsely meant that I was not able to get immediately on top of this. I'm gonna kind of have to catch up on everything that went down. I know a fair amount of what happened, but being banned from Twitter and not being able to do...
I knew it smelled better on Twitter and YouTube. And let me just say, if you're enjoying the stream, please consider donating to the Kollontai crowdfunded translation project. We are so close to fully funding the second chapter out of 3 chapters of the book, and I'm more than halfway now through translating it. I need $140 in order to declare chapter 2 fully funded. And yeah, also it wouldn't half help my situation. I need to be able to eat while I'm working on this because it takes a lot of hours of really painstaking research to do this stuff, and I can't do other work while I'm doing it. So it is really important that I get paid somehow while I'm doing it. So all the people who have donated so far to get me this close to it, thank you so much. It's gonna be a few weeks, I think, before I have the second chapter fully translated. Well, then, wait a second. Okay, 11,000 words. This week I managed about 4,500. So, yeah, like 2.5 weeks, roughly. And once it's done, it will be up as a PDF on my Patreon. The link is on the screen there. And that's also another easy way to contribute to the project. That also includes all my other donation links and stuff on the Patreon page. So anyone who wants to support that project, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am sure you will find the result of it quite satisfactory.
Kinda precludes you from being super caught up on the drama, but this isn't really drama. I feel like we've gotten sort of brain poisoned.
I wonder who might have been involved in that.
Calling these like issues between content creators that are a little bit beyond your average petty disagreement, petty hatred.
Like when you joined in a racist smear campaign against Professor Flowers because she's against colonialism, and you and your Big Daddy Vosh are for it.
Drama. Like, why are you focusing on this? That's the response I got when I covered the Illuminati stuff. And I criticized Lance from the Serfs for...
which is to say he libeled Lance from the Serfs. He just lied.
Defending Illuminati.
That isn't what he did.
And all that came out and attacking her accusers, victim. And Lance continued to, attack me afterwards.
Yeah, because you lied about him, and so he did a stream talking about... showing the receipts that showed you lied.
Never owned.
Well, because it was based on lies.
Have a big tendency to sort of hand wave even serious shit.
Well, maybe what you're saying is that your credibility is lacking amongst people who deal in facts.
As just drama. Past it. And then you've got the super drama mongers who feel serious issues into just drama.
Oh, you mean like you and Foch, for example. Basically, the entire fucking debate sphere, because you don't really have any worthwhile political takes, political analysis. You have absolutely, you're not particularly engaging. You're not particularly knowledgeable about anything. You can't really learn anything from these streams except just how to do manipulative debating tactics. Because you and Vush are ignoramuses. So, yeah, I mean, this is, the only thing you've got. And that's why, if you look at his YouTube channel, it is full of this stuff.
Right? There's, two very bad sides of the same coin. This particular issue is, on surface level, it seems like it's nothing but petty internet drama. But if you actually know the lore, you come to find out that there is some horrific behavior.
Guys are setting up racist hate mobs to attack their critics, particularly when they're people of color. I mean, it is actually quite serious, and I wonder who's doing that.
Behavior.
Here, I will drop the donation link in the chat. Thank you, bon conseil. Sit. Voici.
That has become normalized within, particularly now.
Yeah, that is where his hate mobs are centered.
Ever since a mule video about me came out,
yeah, that was a good video.
I feel like most of the left that I occupy has become very...
Hey, that's a good word for it. He does occupy it. He is an occupier. He has no business being there, and it would really be nice if he left.
The idea that there are lefties now that are just abusing who will go after people.
Well, I mean, he's giving himself credit there, calling himself a lefty. God, I hate that fucking term.
And, attack them for dishonest, made-up shit.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, it's this is autobiographical.
as like an abuse strategy is no longer this insane theory idea that it was like a couple years ago. It used to be, when I would talk about abusers on the left, I would be met with vitriol from my fans.
Well, yeah, that's because your fans didn't realize you were one of them yet. When they realized you were, they decided to join in.
Like, I would legitimately, like, what's a good example? Oh.
A good example of this, let me see. Oh, well, that was that time that Bush endorsed literal Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda about Jews controlling the banks in the beginning of a debate with Luna and EJ. And when Luna and EJ rightly said, we're not going to continue this conversation if you're going to be putting out that kind of fash bullshit, he then lied and claimed they were the ones endorsing Nazi talking points. And spread that all over the internet, and I'm sure they will have heard from his fucking rabid bevy of suckholes.
When I went after Noah Sampson.
Xander Hole is explaining to us that there are abusive people on the internet. I don't know yet. I mean, so far it just seems like he's telling about, he's just, telling on himself. We haven't gotten a name. I mean, he did say that it wasn't very nice of Lance from the Serfs, to point out the receipts that showed that Xander Hole was lying about him and an Illuminati. He thought that was abusive, that you're not allowed to point out when Xander Hole is lying, especially not if you've got receipts. So that's one thing. So I guess we could say that's manipulative, because it manipulated people into seeing the facts.
Because he was doing defense of Professor Flowers, and I criticized Noah Sampson.
Yeah, because Professor Flowers did nothing wrong. She just made a very basic point about decolonization, and Bush went straight up white nationalist, white genocide bullshit on her, and mobilized a racist hate mob that basically kicked her off the internet for a while. So, yeah. I mean, that's a really good example of manipulative content creators occupying your words, Xander Hole, leftist spaces online, and using them to abuse people and lie.
Got a lot of shit from my own fans for that, and got proven right with that.
No, you deserved much more shit than you got. You deserved to delete your fucking channel over that.
My point is, it used to be a lot harder. Yeah, Mel even. It took a long time for people to accept that Mel and Luna Oi are bad.
Oh, geez, this is the greatest hits of the biggest campaigns of lies that he's told.
Luna Oi is literally, her family. Like, she is literally like a Nepo baby of the, Vietnamese communist. Like, her bullshit about, like, all the benefits she and her family get from the Vietnam.
Oh, okay, and we can be fairly certain he's making this up. But, I mean, as I already mentioned, the reason that he's so pissed off at them is that they called Vosh out for anti-Semitism, and the best he could do is to say, I know you are, but what am I? And just lie about it, and it was transparent to everybody who saw the video that he was lying. So
Vietnamese government, that's because her family works for the Vietnamese Communist Party. Like, she's special. She gets special treatment. That's not how it's like to live as work.
How the fuck would you know? And actually, I mean, considering that basically everyone who gets any kind of government benefits in Vietnam is getting benefits that were decided by the Vietnamese Communist Party, because the Vietnamese Communist Party are the benefits, kind of everybody is getting benefits from the Vietnamese Communist Party because that's the way the government's set up, you dickhead.
Class in Vietnam. I actually fell for a lot of that bullshit when I watched American Johnson's videos in 2019, and I was a dumb little...
Well, why don't you provide us some actual receipts? See, the people that you're smearing right now, They provide receipts. You can look at the videos, you can look at the fucking screenshots, you can see the facts. Why didn't you provide some of those? That would really, see, I'm thinking like a debate streamer now. That would really enhance the credibility of what he's doing here.
I fell for a lot of the propaganda, like lies about like how fantastic living as a working class person. Her family are landlords, I recall.
Oh, according to whom? You're just making this shit up.
Wealthy, like powerful in government. Yes.
Based on what? Where, like, you have anything to back any of this up?
And then American Johnson, like, used to like an American military contracting agent.
He's never actually, it's worth noting, made a secret of this. He has a whole video. So, you know, sort of like Xanderhole has a whole video on how he used to be a Nazi and now he pretends not to be one. EJ has a whole video on his time as a serial entrepreneur and what he learned from that and why he learned from that actually the best move in that game is not to play it. That capitalism sucks.
Isn't this true? What was the background on American Johnson?
You see, what if I told you there's a debate streamer, a kind of prominent one, who used to be a neo-Nazi? And now makes money off of the fact that he used to be a neo-Nazi. Oh, I'm looking at him.
Non-compete had? He worked in, like, he used to work for, like, an American military contract. Production of something or something like that, or
I mean, you notice he's just making this up as he goes along right here. Because he isn't looking at anything. He could just be looking, he has a screen in front of him. He could be looking this up.
Or, I don't even know. It was a job that lefties would be like, really?
Well, yeah, but the thing is, he's been quite open about how he had a whole string of occupations that leftists would be like, yeah, really? And how he learned from that the entire system that he was trying to make money off of sucked, and not to continue doing that. This isn't like some sort of big disclosure. This isn't, you know, EJ exposed. This is stuff that he's talked about numerous times. One of his main talking points when he's arguing in favor of communism is, I actually am a former serial entrepreneur and shit. I actually tried to make this thing work and had a moderate amount of success occasionally. And here's what I learned from that experience, and explaining it based on that. So, I mean, this isn't only people who know nothing about EJ and Luna would immediately...
He owned a company. What was the company he owned?
He owned various. This isn't a fucking secret.
Okay, he was a company owner. What was it?
He's got a whole video on this. It's like my life as a serial entrepreneur. It's on Non-Compete's channel. And if you look at it, I mean, he talks all about it, and he talks about the lessons he learned and how that led him to turn to communism. This is such a non-dunk, it's a nunk.
I forget what it was, but it was something weird. I don't remember the details. God, this is something I wish I... Fuck.
Yeah, maybe when I try to avoid... I find it's a good policy if you're going to say things that would be, like, really defamatory to a person and possibly constitute libel. I find it's a good idea to have your receipts lined up and not just go off the top of your head and say, oh yeah, this sucks. Like, that's why I was so fucking hedging on when I said Surge. I remember there was something problematic going on there. I don't remember it was, so I'm not going to be very specific about it. Because that's something to look up, and maybe I'm wrong about it. And I really probably should. I didn't know I was going to be talking about Surge when I picked that video, or I probably would have looked it up, because I remember them being controversial for a while. So that's something to look up, and if I'm wrong, and I'll say so. But I try to avoid doing that unless I have the receipts right in front of me. That was an exception that I really probably shouldn't have done, but it was like, off the top of my head. What he's doing is he's just kind of, like, confabulating all this shit about people with nothing in front of him, without having checked his facts, without having checked whether it's even any kind of a fucking dunk. And we're only 4 minutes into this. 4 minutes and 38 seconds into this. We haven't even found out who the most manipulative leftist is who he's going to expose. And it's already time to stop for the night. Thank you to everyone who's joined in. Thank you, Henkiros, GGM, which a name that always makes me think of a scene from the movie Stalingrad, because there's a character called Müller, and this guy, one of the other German soldiers goes, "Bist ja gemeingefährlich, Müller." GGM nennen wir dich. GGM for gemeingefährlicher Müller, like public hazard Müller, or something like that. So somehow that's your username makes me think of that. But in any case, and thank you, Phoenix. Thank you. It's always nice to see all of you. And check out my Patreon regularly, because I am regularly posting updates and tasters from the translation. Well, so have a good night.